We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to The Anadromist. This is Burn Power coming to you on a very leafy day here in Tbilisi, Georgia. And today what I'd like to do is continue with, I haven't given you a Rookmaaker lecture in quite a while. And so I decided I will give you one today. This is, I think, probably his most controversial. Particularly if you're a Christian, but actually I think he hits all the branches on the way down. There's something here to offend everyone, because he just speaks the truth. Like a good Dutchman, he just says things very bluntly. Americans in particular, and Canadians, are not used to that kind of bluntness. So the subject is the post-Christian world. And in many ways, this is a continuation or a recapitulation of some of the ideas that he gave us in What is Reality. But in this, he's focusing the ideas more towards the future, a dark future, he sees it. In fact, it's our present. And I thought this would be a good time to share it. Now, I did use a couple of clips of these in my Prophetic Voices series, so I've just extracted those and put them in here. But I thought about how to illustrate this, and he covers a lot of subject matter. He covers a lot of the same subject matter in different ways. So what I thought I would do is just simply take all of the illustrations that I've already given you for his lectures, and then put them in here in a kind of random, creative way. It'll start off not so random, and then after a certain point, you'll notice that the images don't really align completely with what he's saying. But that's because what he is saying hits on all these different levels at once, and I wanted you to get that idea. So, we're going to go forward with Rookmaaker in just a moment. Let me just remind you, though, that have you subscribed to the channel? Do you get something out of this channel? Then you really, really must subscribe. Truthfully, I use a lot of different material in my lectures that kind of prevents me from getting any money. Plus, I'm prevented from getting any money here in Georgia, because I haven't figured out the way to do that yet. So essentially I put these videos out there for free. I do get support from you folks, and that's the only place I get support from on these channels. I have no sponsors, I have nothing. So there is a GoFundMe link that is still very active, and you can use that, and you will get a tax-deductible receipt at some point. Okay, I did, by the way, get permission from Marlene Hengelaar Rookmaaker, Rookmaaker's daughter, Hans Rookmaaker's daughter, to use these lectures. So this isn't just me, rifling through the places where one can find Rookmaaker lectures, which I would recommend at the Labrie Ideas Library. But this is official. So enjoy it, and we will be back at the end to recover together. Take it away, Hans Rookmaaker.
I would like to give a lecture which I gave some years ago at a conference in Swanwick in England about the Christian in a post-Christian age. It sums up a little bit about the things I'm concerned with and I've been saying. I may re-say some things I've said before. Maybe I put them in a new framework. Anyhow, I will try to do that in the first hour. There are some questions left that we can deal with in the second hour. And then tomorrow morning, tonight, of course, in 7:15, I will give a little bit more of a formal lecture, as far as I'm able to give formal lectures, and it will be called Christianity and Culture, and sums up the problem in a little bit more an academic way, if you want to. And then tomorrow morning, I thought, what shall we do? And originally I thought that's a nice time for discussion, but we have been discussing so much that maybe it would be nice to do something, and the doing might be done by other people. And so I thought that maybe, but I want to present it to you and have you vote on it in a very democratic way. I thought that I might give this lecture on jazz in the 20s. It is the beginning of our own era, looking about things, how they came, and what it meant and why it was there. And maybe you will find out that it's part of your own world much more than you ever thought about. So that would be a lecture with music and going into why this jazz came, what was its meaning, what was its content, what did it mean. I begin with Scott Spritzel's The Jazz Age. Is there any vote against this? Of course, it's sinful and bad and ugly, and of course you're never supposed to listen to that type of music. It's black, and it's played in places where you're not supposed to be, but nevertheless. No votes against it? Strange places, Westminster. Okay, then we do that tomorrow morning. I will arrange for music and so on. What I've been saying is, and what I'm going to re-say this morning, that if we really want to understand where we are today, and I began with that the first day that I began to talk, then we must understand that we live in a world which is bound, which is influenced so much, which is brainwashed by a kind of new approach to reality. Formerly, people thought in the line of ontology. Then, with the 18th century, there's a change, and we go into epistemology. Epistemology being the first. Of course, if you really have a close look at Kant, you will understand that he says that epistemology is first, but of course there is a kind of bit of ontology before you even go to epistemology, because you cannot have an epistemology unless you have an ontology. But it is something that is a new understanding of the world and a new understanding of man. It's autonomous man in an autonomous world. And science becomes the real new revelation, a man-made revelation to man. And men are very much in awe for what science brings us. Very interesting is the difference in the approach before and after the change. When Leeuwenhoek, he was a Dutchman, a very important scientist in the 17th century Amsterdam, and he was a very special man in making microscopes, and he was the first man ever to look through a microscope to a drop of water. And it's very interesting to read what he says. He says, if you look through that microscope and you see that drop of water, then I always thought that God created the world, but now I know that he created two worlds. And he begins to talk about it like this. It's creation, and he's just full of amazement. After the break, we just find new little things. Van den Berg, in his book, which you find in the bibliography, by the way, I don't know where the bibliography is gone to. There must be a pile still. Somebody asked me for it. If you know, please get some copies here back again. But Van den Berg, in his books, tried to make this clear with this. He says the old encyclopedia usually was arranged in a systematic way. It began with God, and then with the world, and so on. And it was just trying to understand the world. And if you look in that encyclopedia under the heading, The Devil's Plant, then you will find a description that this plant is a very powerful plant. It its saps are used for some medicine, and it has curious leaves, and the leaves have holes in it. And the holes are said to be the result of and then comes the story about the man, and the devil was trying to pursue him, but he was able to flee from the devil, but the devil was shooting some darts, and the darts hit this plant, and so there came holes in the leaves, and so you have the holes in the leaves because of that. That's why it's called the devil's plant. If you read in the new encyclopedia, which is arranged in a totally irrational, crazy way, that means by alphabet, that means completely without any system, because we have no system anymore, there is no one grasp on reality, then you look at that same plant, then you will find behind it a kind of Latin name, which makes it totally abstract, and then it goes on to tell you where it is, and what it means, and how it's built, and it will tell you probably that there are some kind of chemicals in it that you can use for medicine. But it's a completely different approach to the same plant. And I love that way that Van den Berg describes it. He says the old plant told you lies about the true plant. The new encyclopedia gives you true facts about the false plant or the no plant. It is gone. It has become completely abstract. We have lost our things. Formerly people stood in awe when there's a certain beetle that cuts the tree, that cuts the leaves in such a way that they can fold up for their little eggs to be laid in and so on. And everybody would stand in awe, look, God's creation, fantastic, how he can do this. Nowadays we say, oh, that's very easy, he just uses this mathematical formula and then it folds up nicely. You see, and we have lost all the awe and all the mystery is gone. And this is a change. And I made a little scheme, I've done that many, many years, and maybe I'll do it again. The scheme is like this, that the old system is this: you have a triune God who created the world, the universe, and in the universe you have angels and devils, and man and animals and plants and things, and norms and laws. Just because of that, you can talk about good and evil. In this world, you can even talk about witches. In 1660, around that time, a book was produced in England that said, it's very easy to prove that God exists. Look around you, witches exist. And he just begins, he says, no, this is right, this is a fact. There are witches, and therefore he builds up this whole world scheme, and he says that's how it is. It's a little bit simplistic maybe, but it's true to a certain extent. Now what has happened in the 18th century is that people said, of course that's a simplification, it is a whole trend beginning with the Renaissance and so on, but it's in the 18th century with Locke and so on, up till Kant, that people said, well, we put God out of the door. It's too difficult, you know, as soon as God is in the picture we get strife, we begin to fight. You have gone through so many religious wars, and let's get God out of the door and let's decide things as human beings among human beings. But people very optimistically thought that nothing would change. But I think that's the sheer optimism. Of course, if I say God doesn't exist, even really meaning that sentence, nothing happens. I don't turn orange or green, or the ceiling doesn't fall down. So people say you can say it, but they're just short-sighted, because something does happen. And what happens, of course, if you put God out of the picture, angels and devils go. And nobody weeps. But what's more important is that norms go. Where are the norms coming from? You see, originally people said, how do you know? Don't kill your neighbor? Well, God said so. But now, how can we do it? And you know all the story of Huémoz, who invented the little myth, and he said in the beginning of history, people found out that it's very difficult if people steal or kill. And so we made a social contract. And it is a man-made system to make society go. So you have the social contract. It's Huémoz, you all know him, and of course it's Jean-Jacques Rousseau who talked about these things about a century later. And that's the beginning of the Enlightenment, when these things began to be on reality. Now, if norms go, then you cannot talk about good and evil anymore. And, of course, it took time before these things were realized. But nowadays we see that around us. And, again, nobody wept. But you begin to weep again, you begin to understand that man is gone. And I was talking about it yesterday, about the Count who was sitting in his room, and he understood that man is gone, that basically man is a rabbit. And he's gone. And the interesting thing is that if you look at the scheme, that this is the only thing that's left. You can put it in another thing and say that's the only thing that's left. We can call it nature if you want to. It's nature. And man is there, and he is a rabbit or an atom. He is just there without much meaning. Now, of course, man cannot take this, and he tries to jump out to get to his proper place. And much of modern art is about that. I'm making a jump now, but much of modern art is there. Much of modern art is there. It's bad that man is in the box. That's the horror of being. It's very interesting that even, let's say, a man like Bacon paints man as in the box. And if you go in a museum, you find many times that box image. Man in the box, caught in the box. And he tries to jump out, but here is the world of the totally irrational. Because this is rationalistic. Here you only use your brains. But man, in his reality, is irrational. Of course, that is what the existentialists have been talking about. What is implied is a total change in the way of thinking. Before that time, everybody, no exception, everybody thought like this: you have supreme beings, and out of that grows life. No, the angels, and then man, and then animals, and plants, and things, and then very low down you have the material. And the way of thinking is in this direction. Of course, the book that you all know, by Love, Joy, the great chain, Love, Joy, the great chain of being, talks about the history of this system of thought. But nowadays we have completely changed our thinking. We start with the atoms, because the most certain things is not God, but the atoms. And we think in this way. So out of that, in long stretches of time, came life, and then plants, and then animals, and as a kind of mistaken evolution came man, and man creates God as his projection. So we think in this direction. And if you talk about problems like, let's say the Genesis 1 problem versus evolution, it is the clash between two ways of thinking, two ways of approach to reality. It's a complete new way of thinking. Now, these things are not nice, they're not interesting, they're not just philosophical little things, but they bring with them human problems. And I think that's what we often forget. We think that these things are just for the intellectual, for his classroom, for his exams. They are the deep problems that you think about when you study, but if you go outside, the world is normal. But that's simply not true. These problems really went into our world. For instance, our norms have gone, and we don't know anymore about good and evil. And if you just listen, for instance, to good rock music, let's say somebody like Bob Dylan and Paul Simon and all these people, they talk about these things. Leonard Cohen, they talk about the fact that norms are gone, and that therefore their life has become meaningless, and that they don't know how to live. It's not a great pleasure, but it's a great despair. We don't know what's good and evil, and yet they know what's good and evil because they're human. And so there's the clash that they know. A little story, Dr. Schaeffer once told me. He was in Oxford and was discussing, and there was a very, very, very intellectual Indian man, and he talked about the great systems of the East, which were much better than the Christian. And one of the implications was there is no good and evil. Pain doesn't exist. It's just illusion. And Dr. Schaeffer said, I didn't know what to do. And so it struck me, and he stood up. There was water boiling, ready to make tea. And he just took the kettle and he held it over the man's head. He said, "Shall I pour?" You say pain doesn't exist, it's an illusion. Well, the man ran off, and it was the end of the talk. Life, as a result, has lost much of its reality. Man is living in this world, but reality has come, the world is reduced, it's become small. Autonomous man is a kind of an atom. And man is an atom in endlessness. That's the way we look at ourselves. And I say we because we have very much been influenced by this. I gave you in another lecture this beautiful quote of C.S. Lewis, who talks about it, where we have ended in zero. And if you say these things, the world says, yes, you're right. And how do we get out of it? I remember I gave this as a long lecture once, and it was a very crowded room somewhere in London. And there was a girl sitting just in front of me, and as soon as I was ready, she jumped up and said, "How do I get out of the square back in the circle?" And she felt this is right. I remember another story. I was giving the same lecture with rock music to illustrate it, and the wife of my pastor had come with me. And on the front row was a girl. I've never seen a girl with such a mini skirt, and well, she was totally a hippie. She must have been young, I guess 17 or 18, and just finished high school in England. And the pastor's wife told me later, I thought that when you were ending your lecture, and I end my lecture, says, how do we get back in the circle? And we can only do so if we really get back God in the picture, because otherwise it doesn't work. This is the only way to get back, because if you behead the universe dies, and that's what we have been seeing. So if you want to get it alive, put the head back on it, and well, something like this. And this pastor's wife said to me, when you were talking about those things, I thought that girl would jump up and run away. And the interesting thing is, as soon as I finished, she came up to me and says, I wished I'd never heard your lecture. Why? Because it had exactly said where she stood. And my experience is that just many young people and many just not intellectual people do understand these things very deeply, because it's their life. It's not just philosophy. Yes?
Why would you say that social contract is inadequate?
Because it's man-made. Okay. You see, what we give, it's different to say that we give form to a norm. You see, a norm of life is marriage. How do you do your wedding? 3 days or 1 day? Is it the minister, or is it one of the civic people? Do your marriage with a white gown or a red gown? Do you get a ring, or do you get a chain, or don't you get anything? Well, these are cultural forms, and that's how we give form to it. And that's something that man's made. But man can only make it because God gave the form, gave the box in which to put these forms. So gave the structure in which to put this form. Now, if you take the structure and say we made the structure, then basically everything is man-made. The next man says, why should you do it? Because man has invented it. And that's exactly what man says today. All these old norms about sex and so on, they're just man-made. So we can discard it easily. After all, it's true that man is a rabbit, so let's live like a rabbit. It's more true. You see, but I would say, no, it doesn't work like that. It's not true, just because it's not man-made. I think that we got to think very deep about this. Our spirituality, jumping out of the box, has become very ghost-like. And in that system, of course, religion is something totally subjective. It's something completely, totally outside any question of truth. You cannot ask, is Christianity true? That's a silly question. The only question is it nice? Does it work? Are you satisfied with it? And then it helps maybe. But you can never ask the question of truth. It's outside of reality, social reality, any reality. It may only be good for you. Of course, people are always very nice. I find that people are always extremely nice. I mean the non-Christians. They are very fine people. They always say to you, okay, you're wonderful that you are a Christian. And they accept you as long as you not bring your Christianity to the place where it's really vital. You see, if we discuss economics, if we discuss politics, if we discuss science, if we discuss the really important matters of this world, then you should just use your brain and be human among the human people. Of course, it's very fine. Sing your hymns on Sunday, get to heaven if you think that's the place to go, to read your Bible, pray, but do it always outside of that place. Because if you do it there, then you get in trouble. You see, because that stuff doesn't belong, because we're human among the human. You bring in difficult things, we get strife, we get difficulties, but as soon as you say, this is true, well, there's something to fight for, and it creates difficulties. And it's not sometimes not nice, and their tensions grow. It's not easy, but just because it's so true and so strong, that's why it creates the difficulties. But they say, okay, go ahead, but outside of the rule. I'll come back to that later. Why did Christians fall for that system? All this has resulted in what they have called a demasking of values. The whole 19th century see people going on demasking values, taking away the mask, taking away the lie. After all, it's only love. What is love? After all, it's only a sexual urge. And the rest is just a facade that man has made. So love becomes sex. I gave you that story about the boy and the girl sitting on the bench in Paris. Love is gone. And people weep. People weep. You must understand it's not just a nice little system, and we must understand that it simply doesn't work, because, and that's the great grace of God, some people call it common grace, I don't like that term, nevertheless, it is the great grace of God that He says, okay man, you can do what you want, but the world is still God, the world, and you are still human, and you can never get out of it. And so it's always this tension that love is gone, yes, but there's still love there. And so there are tears because people don't feel that there's something wrong. They want to jump out of that box. They want to be more than rabbits. That's basically what the protest is about. Beauty is demasked just the same. It's a psychological response. It's only that we have invented. And so a couple of days I was probably too violent and too emotional, but I had a very strong discussion when I was up in Boston with one of the people there. I said, the beauty is something that we make. It's just a little pattern. And I'm willing to fight for that till the very end, that beauty is outside of us. Not because I think beauty is outside of us is the most important thing in the world, but I think it's tied up with all our understanding of reality. And if it's not outside of us, we can forget it and we become modern man, and we can weep tomorrow with them that everything is lost. We were just talking the other day, Kefa and I and some other people, about witchcraft and so on. If we don't believe that there are powers outside of us, the whole world becomes something surrealistic, very strange, ununderstandable. The result of these things are cultural. For instance, in music, we have high music, fine, extremely fine, refined fine music. It's the modern music. It's so refined and so far away that, of course, you really get some cultured music if it has no rhythm. Rhythm is too earthly. Of course, it should have no melody. Melody is too simple, old-fashioned, you know. And it should have no harmony, because then you just follow again the laws of this world. So in the end, you get a music without rhythm, melody, and this. Well, of course, John Cage went to the very far extreme, but many other people do, and just listen to it. It's horrible. And almost nobody listens to it. But no serious, good musician is ever willing to go in for something popular that is down. And so we have two strains of culture, two strains of music, and even that simplification, more than two, of high music and low music, entertainment, and we make it cheap. We make it cheap. The whole result is that man is dead. Of course, this has been said many, many times, and that's the message of existentialism. It is a void around us. Our life is a pilgrimage to a cross in the void. We are just living here, vegetating. everything is meaningless. And I'm teaching at a university which is a Christian university, and there are some problems implied I'm not talking about, but many of our students are not Christian at all. And if you see them working, and sometimes the lack of incentive and the lack of interest, and if you really go down why, they say, well, everything is meaningless. Why do we live for? What is it for? And it makes life so empty. They just are there. And it's really despair. There is no truth. Well, let's make life easy. Let's have an easy chair and an easy this and have our insurance. And so we get into the easy chair mentality. We ask what has utility, what is nice to, but they never ask about reality. Just one bit more. I said truth is not there, and man is dead. Just a little aside, a little bit naughty maybe, but I think that one of the things that you ought to read is pornography books, because they tell you the truth. It's very interesting. If I would just think in my mind, what is a pornography book? Well, a pornography book says that everything that counts is sex. So what you write is that men and women are jumping in bed just as they meet each other without all the social constraints and all that. You just go ahead, you see, just like in one of these pornography books that I didn't read but read about, it goes like this, that the man is entering a women's convent, and within 10 minutes he is going around sexually with the abbess. Of course, it's completely crazy, but it's beautiful. Well, that is pornography. But the interesting thing about pornography books is that usually it's not like that. Or it is like that, but after 10 pages the problems begin. And in the end you see that everything is in a mess. These people know. They talk about the world. I remember that I was once waiting a long time for a plane. I just had to change planes at Chicago Airport. And so I went to the bookshop there and I looked into the little books. And of course there was quite a bit of these little pornography books. And so I didn't buy the book, but I just stood there just reading it quickly, because I just had the time. I'm a quick reader. So, well, it talked about a girl who went downtown New York to work in her uncle's shop, and then she falls through a hole in the street, and then she comes in the underworld. And that night she went through the most horrible experiences. The next morning she finds her way back, and she comes to the uncle in the shop. And the poor thing that the uncle does, of course, is to rape her. So, and you can only say it in a very rough language, so I'll do it, but this was the last page of the book. So the man was fucking her. And she said to her uncle, "This night I found something that there is nothing worth living for." And the uncle answered, "You're right, but there's also nothing worth dying for. So what shall we do?" "Well, just fuck on." And you see, and I think it's so true what these people are saying. Man is dead. The hippie said, is there any life before death? And that's what these books are talking about, is the realities of life. There is nothing sentimental about these books, usually. They talk about truth, and I think that it's sometimes good to read these things, just to realize that it's not just a little trip, that it's not just a little sin, but that's utter despair, and the end of meaning, and that people know it, that it's destruction. And so it is very strong literature, usually. And it's not very just a rosy world, idealistic. Maybe that's what we sometimes think, but it isn't. Nature is dead. It's only atoms. There's alienation. I think that's all very deep and very, very desperate, and that's the world around us. And out of that you can understand much of the modern literature and art and music, rock music, and youth problems. They're usually much deeper than we think. It's not just a little bit a matter of adjustment. I begin to hate that term. It's not a matter of adjustment, but it's a matter of living in the world and be right in truth, and be on your place, be home in the universe, or being a complete alien in the world. These are the problems. What is much worse, and brings it much more home to ourselves, is that there are many, many people who try to evade the problems. And evasion and escapism are strong in our world. It is the people who are here. If you just think about it, here is Christianity. That might be an answer in remaking the circle. Then usually people fall down and are here. And I use a term that the existentialists have invented and that the Marxists are using, and that's bourgeois. The bourgeois person. The bourgeois person is one who tries to evade the problem. Father wants to go to bed with the woman next door. Why doesn't he do it? Well, you know, it's difficult, it might be found out, and what about my career? And what about my job? And basically, what will the neighbors say? And we can understand that the son of that man sometimes jumps in the bed of the daughter of the woman next door because he says it doesn't matter. If that's the only rule, that what the neighbors say, then forget about it. And that's much of the modern youth culture. They just say, we're sick of it. And they're right to be sick of it. If our norms are only just what the neighbors say, basically, and in a very superficial level, the social contract, forget about it. It doesn't mean a thing. It's a facade. It is the emptiness behind the mask. We laugh. It's beautifully conveyed by a song of Paul Simon. He sings about this, and the refrain of the song is that people continue to pretend. Beautiful the way he pretend. They not just continue to pretend, but they continue to pretend that life will never end and flowers never bend in the rainfall. Well, that is the bourgeois life. Life will never end and flowers never bend in the rainfall. Bob Dylan talks about it in Desolation Row. And these things are not outside of Christianity. The church people, ourselves. I've been thinking very much about this. Who are the bourgeois? And I'm bound to say that the bourgeois is just fallen Christianity. These are people who want to live the Christian life. They want to have the good life. They want to live the moral life. They want to have everything that's beautiful and fine, but without the base, without the true God. And it becomes empty. And if you want to understand something of that world, then of course it's not something of today, it's of all ages. And you just read, for instance, Isaiah 1, and God says, you go to the church. I translate it in 20th century terms. You go to the church, and you have your offerings, and you do all these things. But it is a stench in my nose. I hate it. Why? Because you're not concerned with the poor and the oppressed. Because you just live very nicely, but you don't look at the realities of the world. You don't really believe in me. You don't really think about me. There's no love. Not for me, not for your neighbor. And I think that the small prophets and the big prophets in the Bible, they speak about this. They think about this. It is, of course, what Christ talked about when he talked about the Pharisees. They were the orthodox people in his days, and they didn't accept him. Why? Because he was talking strong, and they wanted to be nice. Safe also from the pollution. So Christ was eating with the harlots, the prostitutes. But they said, how can you do that? You're such a nice Christian. And he said, that's the place where you ought to be, because these people are in trouble and you are not. You see, it's fantastic that exactly, let's say some people like the Beatles are talking about that. In one of their songs they say that these are people who have gained the world and lost their souls. That's not of great prophet, that's not a theologian, but that is the Beatles who are saying that. These are people that gained the world and lost their souls. They talk in that same song about love that has grown cold. Love that has grown cold. And it's very interesting if you think about it. Yes, I want to have my Bible. Matthew 24, verse 12. It's a very interesting text if you lay it aside, this statement by the Beatles. Matthew 24, verse 12. It's a very interesting text if you lay it aside, this statement by the Beatles, 1964 or something. Matthew 24, verse 12. Where Christ says that in the end of days, and because wickedness is multiplied, most men's love will grow cold. It's a Bible quote. Very interesting what the Bible says. Because wickedness grows, man's love will grow cold. Not the other way around. We always think the other way around. If you lose your faith, then wickedness comes. No, says the Bible. Wickedness grows and then love grows cold. I think that is what you see in the world around us to be true. To be true. What is faith? I can tell you what faith is. It's tradition. And that's all there's left. But if faith is tradition, then we got to defend the world around us. And so Christians become right-wing. And they begin to stand for the establishment. And that's what they're fighting for. And I think that is Christianity which has lost its power. Salt that has lost its saltiness. There's another result of this, another way of talking about the Christian, in a more positive way if you want to, and that's one of the problems that you all have to face as far as you are preachers or leaders in anything like Christianity. Christianity is absurd. Just think about it. You go to church on Sunday and you hear a sermon and the preacher will say, and Christ is the center of the world, and unless you go to him, there is no life. And you go outside of the church, you turn on the radio, and everything outside of you, the word goes fine without Christ. And what you've said in church becomes an empty word without meaning. It becomes void. I think that our sermons sometimes fall in a deep void, in a big hole, a world without God, and the word goes fine. At least that's the preaching of the world. It is Tertullian's word that I believe, even if it's absurd, but in a new way. In a new way. It is the whole world around us which is different. And that's one of our problems. Christianity almost has grown absurd. Not because Christianity is absurd, but because the world around us is absurd. But we got to try to find where we stand. And it's a difficulty of our preaching. That's why it's so important that people read their Bibles as a kind of antidote. Just such a little thing that we heard this morning, this psalm, the reality of the lightning, much more than just little electric energy. The Genesis 1 problem, of course, is in this place here too. We must understand that we live in a very quickly changing world. We live in a revolution. And people, that's very typical of man. Man is a creative being. He wants to create the world as he sees it. And so he wants to make a world according to his understanding of it. A world without laws and norms, therefore without authority. And he very optimistically thinks it goes. But if you look at America, you see that the asylums, the insane asylums are full. And that the young people are in trouble. And that there's so much criminality. And still the optimism goes on. The next revolution will bring it. But what do we stand for as Christians? And I would say we stand for the most basic things in Christianity. That what flows out of Christianity, freedom. We have to fight for freedom everywhere against the new tyrannies. The tyrannies of the people say this is a new lifestyle, and if you're not going in that way, you're out. You see, once a girl came to me and she was on the little committee which was, this is very democratic, this is the way they do it today in Holland, very democratic government of a very large building which you would call a dormitory. The problem is, can we have conception means slot machine in the building? Yes or no? It's supposed to be a Christian place. And she asked me, what shall I vote for, yes or no? And I said, that's a mighty problem. I wouldn't know. It's both wrong, as usually things are when they get so far out of place. Both are wrong. It's awful when girls get pregnant just because everybody's doing it. And then it's better to have the anti-conceptional means. But on the other hand, in a way, in Holland they always protest marching, you see, the women are the boss over their bellies. That's the big slogan. And that means they want to have abortion. But I say these women got to be bosses over their bellies a little bit before that time. And then they got to fight for that. But what I said to that girl is what you got to fight for basically is this, the right not to jump in somebody's bed. That freedom got to be defended today. And if you do that, there should be no social ostracism. I think that's very important that we fight for values in the midst of all this. We fight for love. We fight for other people's freedom and love. And of course we are asked many questions, answers, very difficult questions. Some so difficult. It's as if nobody thought before, because the questions are so new. Of course we have the basic questions in God's Word, but what does it mean today? That is the task of the prophet, to say this is what God is saying today. We find out that sciences and that lifestyles and that governments are not neutral. And we're finding it out more every day and a day again. Because the neutral world means an a-religious world, and that basically means an anti-religious world, and that certainly means anti-Christianity. Of course you can have your little mystical experiences and transcendental meditation and so on. That's trendy, then fine. You can have it. After all, these people are not difficult, they just walk as everybody else. But Christians, they talk about the real living God. That's more difficult. So we got to understand that the world is not neutral. And I think Christians, the bourgeois, is always so optimistic. They don't believe these things, that these things are not neutral. And therefore they pass it by. There's the problem, the great problem, I'm not going to expound on it, of communication. How do we communicate with the world today? And the modern theologian says, I want to communicate, and therefore I do away with all these things that I cannot approach modern man with, these old fairy stories of a virgin birth and all that. I talk about the basic things. But in doing that, he has thrown away exactly the very means of communication, because what you have to communicate if you've thrown away the basic facts of Christianity. But we shouldn't try to make a little fortress of our own, which you find so often in fundamentalistic circles. We build a little place for our own, and we shut the world out, because the interesting thing is just by doing that, the world comes in, and we sometimes so optimistically take up the thought forms of this world, and therefore we begin to lose our understanding. In everything that I'm going to have said up till now, in all these problems, and we live in a problem age, and the problems just pop out, and it's too big. We have the feeling that modern man is looking for an answer, and it is as if we try to get rid of a very, very big heap of coal with a little shovel as our children have. And we want to do it at once, and it doesn't work. Why is that? And I think because in all that there is something very, very important going on. It is the wrath of God. God is working in our age. Isaiah says something very interesting. I just want to read one little word. Isaiah 9:18, if you want to write it down. But you could write down just Isaiah, because all pages of it are full of this. And I have no time to expound on it, because then I would still talking at 12 tonight. Isaiah 9:18. Wickedness burns like a fire. That means that if you are wicked, it burns, it kills, it destroys. It is a natural cause and effect. Wickedness burns like fire. But, so he goes on, through the wrath of the Lord of hosts, The land is burned. There's more than just wickedness that burns like fire. No, the Lord is putting in fire. He's burning. There's more than just natural cause and effect. There's more than we can understand by our analysis. And that more is exactly what the Bible is talking about. God is acting in history. He says, I hate it. I hate it. Just as he was talking in those days against those people, the circumcised people of Israel, who didn't take heed of the Lord and just read all the prophets, how they were talking about. Just the same we can say today we live among a baptized nation. And nevertheless, we are walking as if God doesn't exist. We follow the great gods almighty of our day. Money, power, sex, pleasure. The easy chair mentality. That's our religion today. And God says, I hate it. And I think we got to think about it in our problems of the world. We live in a collapsing world, but it's God who's acting in it. Yes, people talk today of a God who is dead. He is a hidden God. And I would say, yes, God is hidden. Of course He's hidden. We read about it in the Bible, and God says, I have hidden myself because of your iniquities. I'm not coming. I've been preaching the gospel enough. I've told you what to do. And if you're not listening, I'm not there when you just want to have me. I'm not your little slave. Isaiah 57:17, if you want to write down the text. There is a power of deception, of delusion, a strong delusion sent by God. That is what God is saying in 2 Thessalonians in the letter of Paul. We live in a time as Revelation 13. I always find this a fantastic text, just to sum it all up what I'm trying to say at this moment. And so I will read it, and I'm not going to expound on it because I don't feel like preaching. Hear the word of the Lord, O people of Israel, for the Lord has a controversy with the inhabitants of the lands. That was not Israel. Of course it was Israel. But this is what God is saying, I think, today to the Western world, Europe and America. And just think about, well, what does He say? I have a controversy with the inhabitants of the land because there's no faithfulness, no kindness, no knowledge of God in the land. And I'm not telling secrets. And therefore, there is swearing, lying, killing, stealing, committing adultery. They break all bounds, and murder follows murder. What is the expression of our age? What is our pride? It's the Godfather. A big mafia man. And we make a film of him. We turn him into a saint, more or less. It's even nostalgia. This is the great age of the mafia. Murder follows murder. We got to see where we're heading for. And just read your papers. These things are there, always, again and again. Lying, stealing, murder. Adultery. Adultery has become a system. Free love, swapping wives, and so on. Is that a nice world? No. So I go on quoting. Therefore the land mourns, and all who dwell in it languish. That's what I began to talk about. It's the despair of our age. It's the lack of guts, because there's nothing worth dying for, because there's nothing worth living for. But it's interesting that the text goes on, and also the beasts of the fields and the birds of the air and even the fish of the sea are taken away. And I'm thinking about pollution and about the dead fishes because of the poison in the streams. In the Rhine, which once was the most fantastic river of salmon, what do you say here? Nowadays there is not one. It doesn't exist. It's finished. No, there are dead fishes on the stream. Hosea 4:1 and 3, and just read on. I have no time for it. The church, one has to be salting salt. We are salt, and we are the salt of the earth, fighting against corruption. But it often has become saltless, a little sentimental trip on Sunday. telling you, oh, everything is fine, peace, 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 God's temple is here, and you're very fine, you're saved. Are you saved? You go to heaven. Forget about the rest. And I think that the de-Christianization of our world, the church turning more and more empty, is because of this, because there's nothing to say. The question is, why has Christianity has had so little to say against all these things? And I think because of the nature and grace duality. Of course, grace means faith, but it's faith turned loose of the body, loose of the world. It is a kind of spirituality which is ghost-like, cut away from the flesh. And it's piety, but it's aside our work. And of course every Christian has a bad conscience, except when he is a missionary or a pastor. And if you happen to be a woman, you got the woman of a missionary, or you got to be the typist in the missionary's office. Otherwise, what are you doing for Christianity? If you work somewhere else, you lose. And we all have a bad conscience. But nature, we just gave it to the world. And it has been filled by the world. And it has lost its meaning. And we didn't protest against it. Yes, we protested against Darwin when he said, Genesis 1, forget about it, it came by evolution. But we never were there at the moment that these things were discussed. It's so much deeper than a little denial of a text. So religion is something far away from reality, and we have accepted it. We have accepted to pray and to sing hymns and to read the Bible outside of the classroom, outside of where the real discussion is, outside of politics, outside of economics. We have accepted that, and in accepting it, we have given the way over to all these things. So I would say, if we look at the world around us, if we see the corruption and the very bad state that America is in, and if you go to Europe and you see the very same things, in some ways we are very far advanced over you, in other ways we are behind you. But if we see that, then we must say, yes, but Christianity has a share in it, because they were never there. They didn't talk. They were not prophetic. They didn't try to answer the question. They didn't try to stem the tide. We were there, or rather we were not there. Particularly modern art, extreme. Why? Because Christians weren't there to be salting salt. On a more personal level, there's still the question of the hippie. Is there a life before death? What is the way back? What is the way back? The world says revolution. We change the structures. And as I said in another time, that's too optimistic. We cannot analyze and we cannot make a good blueprint of a new world. And certainly revolution will bring new pain. Other people say, let's try to have what we have. Let's try to keep it. Let's try to be conservative. And so there's much conservative right-wing thinking around us. But I think it's no answer. The reality is there. Reality, the truth is there around us. We just have to grasp it, just like the boy and girl I was talking about the other day. Love was there. You only have to grasp it. But you cannot grasp it cheaply. You have to fight back for it. And we got to heal. There must be healing power. We really got to heal something in our culture. The divorce between art and reality, between love and sex, between bodilessness and the spiritual, between religion and reality, between culture and technique, between man and nature, between man and man. All these things got to be healed if we want to have anything. We will never have it perfect, but we can work for it. How do we have the things back that we all long for? A better world. It's not technology that can do it, because technology is just fighting the disease with the disease. It's going back to God. And that got to be our preaching. We got to be prophets. We don't save souls because it's not enough. We got to begin to live. And that is hard. Nobody can say, do you want to be happy? Become a Christian. The slogan got to be, do you want to be unhappy? Become a Christian, because the next moment you are weeping because of the world that you see in decay. You begin to see it. And it's hard work. You got to do something. and make your hands dirty because you got to work. But God is a God of life. Christ died for it. He didn't die to make us Christians. He died in order to make us human. If you want to say there is a life before death, it shouldn't be a slogan, but it should be reality. Of course, we cannot do that as individuals. We got to do that in Christ together. That's why we're praying for reformation. That's why we're praying for revival, reformation, thinking anew what is the Bible saying. Revival, really walking with the Lord in a moment by moment. Decisions. Prayer is needed and work. And it takes a long time. And we got to show something of the fruits of the Spirit that Galatians is talking about. We got to be salting salt. And we shouldn't be just a little piece of straw on the stream of history, but we got to fight back. But it is not easy. We fight against the establishment. I think it's a typical task of the Christian to be a protester. The prophets were protesters. No, our Lord himself, Christ, is a supreme protester. He said, I'm not accepting this world. I'm not accepting death. I'm not accepting these things. I'm doing something about it. Of course, he could say something, and where we had just words, he could do something. And that's what Christ did. He's the main protester. He never said, accept this world, it's so beautiful. Just look at him, how he walked in Israel in his time. And he was not for revolution, but he was equally not a right-winger. And he didn't say, look at the world and accept it. It was protest. Protest, very difficult. Hunger and thirst for righteousness. But it was protest in love. Protest in love. If we see the world as God's world, an open world, then we are able to say with C.S. Lewis, I'm sick and tired. I'm going to give my own version of this little quote, which is somewhere in one of his books, but I don't have it with me. But C.S. Lewis says somewhere, I'm sick and tired of all the little books that are written about Christianity. And we don't need any more of those little books. What I'm dreaming about is that one day people are going to a bookshop to buy a good introduction in biology, and the very first book that they hit upon is a book written by a Christian. And the same must be true in theology and mathematics and sociology and aesthetics, and just go on. Because the world didn't come in the situation where it is in, because he had such mighty preachers preaching atheism, but it was exactly because they were doing the other thing. And if we want to have this society turn back to Christ, to turn back, then we should have these things too. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't preach, that we shouldn't have prophets in the way I was talking about it. The evangelist got to be a prophet. Turn back to the Lord if you want to escape from the wrath of the Lord, because the wrath of the Lord is on this land, now and here. Don't you see it? Don't you see it? Well, if we do that, then we got also to work, and working for renewal means to be interested in all these things and to write the books. It's of course a dream, and it will never be true in 2 years and not in 5 years, but we should work for it. We got to live. Not out of Christian utilitarianism, but out of the validity of life itself. I once upon a time, a long time ago, invented a little slogan. And I said the validity of art is not to be found whether it has any utility to promote the Christian faith. Art is not there to prove Christianity. And if we want to use art for let's say evangelism, we turn it into a little utilitarian tool, and it becomes emptied of meaning. But it's rather like this, that Christianity is there to prove the validity of art. Christianity is there to make art real. And because God gave it to us, and we say, thank you, Lord, it's fantastic. That's another way of thinking. And I think is true of so many other parts of reality. Christianity is not a religion. It's talking about the truth and reality. That's why I am a Christian. I'm a totally unreligious man. That's why I'm sitting here, I'm afraid. Truth, reality, freedom, love, beauty, righteousness. Truth, reality, freedom, love, beauty, righteousness. They are all have very much akin. They are almost undefinable things, and yet they are the most important thing. But we got to do the truth. That's what the Bible teaches us. And reality is an open reality. And we can only grasp it if we have real freedom, the freedom that God gave us. And the love that we got to have should not be tinkling cymbals. Paul says if your love is just that, then forget about it. Love got to be real. And beauty is much more than our little sentimental thoughts about things. And if we fight for righteousness, it means protest. It's hard, it's tears. These things are not easy. It means to be servants. It means to be a light on a channel. But light because there's real love. Is there a way back? Is there a way back? I would say yes, but give the strategy to God. That's too big for us. And for us there's a promise. In the midst of all this, He will take care of you. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Christianity is the preaching of hope. And out of that hope we work. Till when do we work? Till it's finished. Our death, or maybe when the world puts us into a prison camp, and there's a good chance that this will happen. There's a good chance that this will happen. Maybe we are very near the end. I always say, people ask me, what is the future? Can you tell me about the future? And I say, yes, I can. There are 4 possibilities. The first possibility is that the left-wing revolution will win. And if I look at Europe, I often think that this is the greatest possibility ever. Within 25 years, all of Europe will have its left-wing government. It's heading far in that direction already. But in many, many universities, the only teaching that is heard is Marxism today. Left-wing revolution, but nobody should be optimistic. If the left-wing come there, then they are tyrants and there's no place for the Christian. Why? Because he's a Christian. Well, nobody's interested in Christians. Let them live, let them have their little church. That's not the problem. But if we stand for what we should be standing for, that's freedom and humanity and righteousness, for truth, for life. If we fight for these things, there's no place for us, and they will put us into a concentration camp in one way or another. I always said at this point, I hope to meet you there. The second possibility is that there is a right-wing counter-revolution. And I must say I was so afraid for America a couple of years ago with the whole Nixon thing, that this right-wing revolution will come true. And of course this danger is always there in Europe, just the same. And it has been true, let's say, in Greece. And it is awfully true in Chile, a right-wing counter-revolution. But we must understand that the counter-revolution always pats Christianity on the back and says, you're wonderful, if you back me up. But if you fight for righteousness and freedom and truth and humanity, there's no place for you, and they will put you in a concentration camp. And I would say again, I hope to meet you there. There's another possibility, and that's the possibility that Christ comes back tomorrow. That's great. And we all long for it and we pray for it. Another possibility is that there's a real reformation, and that's what we work for and we think for. And I feel that many of the things we are doing, and that's what I'm trying to do, is to make us ready. I don't know the answers, and that's proof that I'm not the big reformer that God is sending. Otherwise I would have the answers. But I hope that I'm one of those people that later on, when God is sending His great reformers, that has prepared the way, and you will hear the voice of the Master, as people in the 16th century heard the voice of Luther and Calvin, and some of them being prepared by long, long times before. They prayed for it and they worked for it. When it came, they said, that's the voice of the Master. I hope we will recognize that voice. It's not easy to be a Christian. It means life. But it's great. It's going on adventure with God. And I think that's our task in this post-Christian age. We shouldn't have sweet things and think that there can be the word peace. The word peace is a true word today. There is no peace. There's only the peace that we feel when we walk in God's ways, and that we feel, whatever happens to me, here I am. and it's great to be a little servant. It's a great adventure, and non-Christians often ask you, "Oh, you're a Christian, that must be very dull, you know all the answers." And I always say, you don't know. It's one great adventure, just because it's so fascinating. I'm not going to preach. It is 12:15, much too long. I've talked here again. Thank you for listening to me. Let's have a little intermission.
So there you are. What will you do? Will you be someone looking for truth, speaking truth? Are you willing to be put into a concentration camp, no matter who comes into power? And that's what he's saying. It's a very powerful message. And the future, this new humanity we are creating, is awfully troubling. And I'll just leave it there. Anyway, from Tbilisi, this is Bern reminding you, like, share, subscribe, even contribute. And as the Georgians say, droabit, which just means just for a little while, we'll be gone from each other temporarily, and then we will meet again.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.